Well, the Chicago Bulls won again. And as I'm sure you guys can imagine, the Pro Tankers are having a field day with this one. Again, we're going to talk about the Chicago Bulls winning and how it's actually affecting their draft position and why the Chicago Bulls can still find an all-star even at pick 9. We'll talk a little bit about that, plus a concerning update to Jaden Ivey and free agent target tier list. We're going to talk about all that plus more right after this. What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host here, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go and get into this content for today, y'all. So the Chicago Bulls beat the Houston Rockets. I mean, it is what it is. They beat the Houston Rockets by 8. They were up by over 20 points at different points in that game. And the Houston Rockets shot the ball absolutely terribly from 3 at the beginning of this game. And, they came back around, but the Bulls still end up shooting over 50% from the field, over 50% from 3. He had 17 points in one quarter from Collin Sexton, who finished with 23 points. And a lot of people are blaming this win just on Collin Sexton. And I can tell that those are the people that are either looking at narratives and didn't actually watch the game, because while Collin Sexton did have 17 points early, he didn't really do much in the second half of this game. And after the Houston Rockets actually came marching back, outscoring the Chicago Bulls in the second half, it was like 79-66, something like that. But after that, it was Matas Buzelis, it was Josh Giddey. Matas Buzelis scored 18 of his 23 points in the fourth quarter of this game. In the second half of this game, and it's just a much better performance in the second half. It was tell it two halves for Matas Buzelis specifically, who still finishes the game shooting 8 of 16, so 50% from the field, over 50% from 3 as well, and he finishes with 23 points, 4 rebounds, 1 assist, no blocks from him, surprisingly enough. And then Josh Giddey, not a solid shooting night from Josh Giddey, only 4-14 from the field for 14 points, but he did get to the free throw line 4 times. He had 13 assists, 7 rebounds to go along with 2 steals and a block. He continues to find ways to impact the game of basketball, even when his shot is not falling, which is really good that you want to see. And then another solid performance from Leonard Miller, who had 17 points in 23 minutes, going 7 of 11 from the field with 9 rebounds, 3 assists. He continues to show you play him minutes, he impacts the game of basketball. And even Rob Dillingham had some moments there. He didn't shoot the ball terribly, 4-7 for 9 points. There were some kind of harebrained moments, but also some moments where he flashed his potential. Yet again, Patrick Williams. I'm not even getting into that, right? But Trey Jones, Jalen, they give us 15 points each as well. But the thing with this game and the thing that it keeps coming down to is fans being upset over wins. And at this point, I'm over that, right? Like, players are going to play to win. People know that. Coaches are going to coach to win. More times than not, people know that. It was the reaction afterwards from some outlets, right? I won't get to naming them because I've been on a very petty streak lately. I'm not going to necessarily name those guys, but you'll know, right? Like that, judge the fact that fans in the stands were cheering the late rally by the Chicago Bulls. That is one of the most asinine things that I think anybody pro-tank, anti-tank has ever said. To talk about why fans who saved up their money, probably bought these tickets months in advance. They didn't buy these tickets after the Bulls decided to tank. Most of these tickets were sold long before the tank even started. They saved up their money. They pinpointed this date. There was somebody on Twitter who said, this was the first game. This was my son's first game. And I'm so glad that my son got to see a win. And I responded to him like, yeah, that's why I went on my rant in the postgame show. It's for things like that that people are overlooking, right? That he got to have that moment with his son. That's more important than tanking for slightly better percentages or anything like that. And so, you want to see your team compete some. Now, they're going to still lose the majority of the games, but it gets into this thing. It goes into the whole philosophy of development versus draft odds. That is the whole thing that happens here is development versus draft odds. I've said it multiple times. I would be one of the biggest pro tankers in saying, let's not win any of these games if we had absolutely no pieces on this team that are going to be part of the future. But we do. Josh Giddey, Matas, regardless of how you feel about Noah Essingay, who's not even playing, regardless of how you feel about Collin Sexton, regardless of how you feel about Rob Dillingham, Matas Buzelis, Josh Giddey, and I'll go so far as to say Leonard Miller as well, right? These are guys that have a chance to be here for a long time. And so because of that, you should want to see these guys competing. I know this is going back to what I've said before. I don't want players on my team that are worried about draft odds. And so that's the part that it just gets into the philosophy part of it that I think that just some people overlook sometimes, right? Like, yes, draft odds. If the Bulls wanted to focus on draft odds, they should have did it at the start of the season, right? They've improved their draft odds. I think some people have made this mistake in their mind thinking that because the Bulls prioritize draft position, they're going to be trying to be one of the worst teams in the NBA. I mean, technically they are one of the worst teams in the NBA since the trade deadline, but they were never going to catch up with the bottom 5-6 teams in this draft. They just were never going to do that. We talked about it early on. The best that they could have hoped to do is get to 7th. That's now basically out of the question as well. So it is what it is. The Bulls are going to need draft luck anyway, right? And that's just the reality of it. The 9th versus 10th, as far as they're back tied now with the Milwaukee Bucks in the 9th for the 9th seed. And of course, that carries about a 6% difference as far as odds at the top 4. That's just the reality of it. But this is still a very deep draft. And I think that's the part that some people are missing in all of this as well. This is a very, very, very deep draft, right? And so I think some people are so caught up because, and this, I promise you, I do not say this to necessarily knock people. I say this as a reality statement, right? Is that most of y'all, and some of the loudest people in regards to the pro tank, they don't even know how the NBA draft is going to work out. All they know is about the top 4 people that everybody's talking about, and they don't know anything other than that, right? They don't understand that this is this could be, and we gotta go out there and prove it, a generationally deep draft where you can get all-star talent in 9 and 10. This could very well be that. Now, I understand the thought process of AK, he gets some things wrong, so you want to eliminate. I understand all of that. But like I keep going back and saying is that it is not going to happen. It was never going to happen. That was, you live in an alternate reality world. If you really did think the Bulls were going to be a bottom 4 team after deciding not to tank with over 20 wins already, like I don't get what you're getting at with that, right? But how can this draft still be salvaged by the Bulls? I think when you start looking, especially if you are watching, NCAA basketball a little bit more than some other people, you know that, hey, even if the Bulls don't climb up and get luck into the top 4, you got Kingston Fleming, you got Braden Burries, you got Keaton Wagler, you got Darius Acuff, you got Mikael Brown, you got other guys in this draft that have all-star caliber skill sets. And that's just the reality of it. Now, are they going to maximize on that? Are they as sure to hit on that as the top 4? Maybe not, right? But when you look at it also, like Jake Fisher recently reported that via the Stein line, that teams really do feel like they'll be able to find lottery level talent in the 20s in this draft, right? So let's be real here. A player that's drafted in top 10 in this draft, this is not typical drafts. And if you wanted to have a conversation about typical drafts, that's one. But when you look at it, all the draft experts are all saying the same thing. This is a draft where you can legitimately get a perennial all-star at 9 or 10. Now, you're going to have to develop them. You're going to have to hope that they hit on their potential, but that's going to be it. This is not typical draft years. And that is why I think that the Chicago Bulls did make their decision to go ahead and prioritize draft positions, because they looked at it and said, listen, we can pay Kobe White $30 million. We can pay Io $18 million, but we basically know who those guys are. We can reset the deck, reset our cap space, and have and give ourselves the best chance at getting a legitimate franchise-altering talent in this draft. It's not just the top 4. You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of last year, because again, people who didn't actually watch the draft, who at the beginning of last year's draft was talked about being extremely deep. And then some of those players didn't have the huge explosion in college like some people had hoped for. And then some of those people then were like, oh, well, this draft isn't even all that deep. You remember when people say that? Now go and look at how good players are that went later in this draft. Now, some of them are flawed and they still have to round out some of their game, but go and look at the depth that was in this past draft in 2025. That's just the reality of it. Stop resting on narratives for your opinion. Go out there and actually do some of your own research. Go out there and actually watch some of these prospects. Stop defaulting to the same talking points that people are giving you. Find your own talking points. Find your own thing to do that. And that's what I'll talk about, right? So yeah, the Bulls have a 4.5% chance at landing the number 1 overall pick. They have a 20.3% chance of landing in the top 4. If that happens, great. That, like, amazing. That would be so amazing to be able to add AJ DeBonsa, Darren Peterson, or thus to this team. But that isn't the end-all, be-all of really good talent in this draft. That may be the best as far as ceiling, but don't act like we haven't seen players in deep drafts actually turn out to be pretty damn good and be players that can lead a franchise. And so, of course, the chances of that are lower at times, and I get that, right? That's why I say I understand where the pro tankers are coming from. It's the reaction that they have to some things. Like, the Bulls need talent over anything, right? Over a position, over anything, they need to add talent, and that's the reality of it, right? The Bulls have Modest Buzelis, who is has tremendous upside. They have Josh Giddey, who's 23 years old, but he's already shown he's still improving even at this age and how long he's been in the league. But then you got guys that are showing that are starting to impress. Leonard Miller, Rob Dillingham starting to show more of kind of what you expected from him from an 8th overall pick. Still has to put it all together and be more consistent in it as well, right? But then the Bulls can have a solid bench next year as well. So I'm just saying it's not all tied to being in the top 4. You can still find talent that is going to help this Bulls team and may even turn into being all-stars even at 9 and 10 in this draft. I can't tell you how many people leave comments like, oh, we're not going to find good talent at 9 or 10. Then you're just exposing yourself and telling me you don't actually watch the NCAA basketball. You don't actually know what you're talking about. You're just sitting here reverberating, repeating talking points, or regurgitating. That's the word I'm looking for. Talking points as you've seen and read and on Reddit and on Twitter. And that will always easily be destroyed by people who are actually aware and actually pay attention to what's going on here around basketball. That's just my thought process on it, right? So we'll see what the Chicago Bulls continue to do with it. This season we got 11 games left. Coming out of this week, we got 3 more games left this week. Well, listen, 8 games. We're going to have 8 games, less than 10 games left by the end of this week. That's going to be crazy to see. But we are winding down on the season, and unfortunately, it's going to be a continued debate, tank or whatever for the rest of the way this season. I just can't wait till we get to the draft lottery and see where things are going to be in the draft lottery so we can end it all, know exactly where we're going to be, and move the fuck on, personally, right? But in talking about moving on, let's us move on to the next topic. Jaden Ivey could be done. And by that I mean this, I want to keep maintaining that the injury that he actually did have and the surgeries that he actually did have, players typically make a 98% recovery from back to who they were before. But we see, much like with Derrick Rose, and I hate to make that comparison, is that it was the repeated injury one after another. And with Jaden Ivey, that could be it. Let's keep in mind, Jaden Ivey had a procedure, right? He broke his fibula. He ended up having to get surgery. He ended up having to get another surgery on his knee to clean out fragments that were left from the surgery. The Bulls then found something recently that was missed by prior doctors. But now Jaden Ivey, who was upgraded and actually returned back to practice for the Chicago Bulls yesterday, bumped knees with one of his teammates, and now the road trip that he was going to travel with the team on, he may not even go on. And that's a 4-game road trip. If the Bulls, if he does not make a return over that 4-game road trip, that means the earliest that he can come back is with 7 games. Jaden Ivey doesn't have much left to be able to actually show the Chicago Bulls anything. And that's the thing. Can Jaden Ivey build any positive momentum heading into restricted free agency? Unfortunately, at this point, I don't think so. I do not think that Jaden Ivey is going to have the runway to build any type of positive momentum. That's just the reality of it. Now, the Bulls could still, because of who he has been and stuff like that, on a team-friendly deal, look to retain him and bring him back. That very well could happen. I'm not trying to count that out. But with us just talking about and naming all the guards in this draft around 9 or 10, the Bulls very well could draft one of those guards, look to keep a player like Colin Sexton, who they kind of know what he's going to bring off the bench if he wants to stay here. And Jaden Ivey could find himself on the outside looking in as far as staying with the Chicago Bulls. It does not mean that Jaden Ivey's career is over. It doesn't mean that another team isn't going to take a shot on him. It doesn't mean that he can't still wake up and get that mentality part together and be able to get back close to the player that he was before. All those are still options there. But but while Jaden Ivey's numbers weren't terrible in his time here playing with the Chicago Bulls, when you watch the games, you saw that this was a player that just did not trust themselves, did not trust their leg, and that is the part that's super concerning. If he was attacking it and then just didn't have the lift that he had before, I'd be like, okay, well, that could come back with time, with working out, all that type of stuff. But Jaden Ivey right now, the last time that we saw him was a player that looked like he didn't trust himself. Then, of course, you have the comments from him that were concerning. I talked about when it happened of him saying the old J.I. is dead, right? And I think that he meant that a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, Jaden Ivey's 24 years old. And while he was a very exciting and athletic monster in Detroit and when he was going through his draft process, the fact of the matter is that Jaden Ivey right now only looks like a shell of that player. And that is hugely concerning. And with the Bulls going into restricted free agency, they better not overpay for him. They have all the leverage, all the power, everything in this one. And if another team does want to take a shot on Jaden Ivey and they're willing to do that, all right, cool, get a sign and trade done for him. But at this point, I can completely see a world in which Jaden Ivey is not retained by the Chicago Bulls. He may not even get an offer sheet. Or if they do give him an offer sheet, they can rescind that as they go through free agency and may realize they need money to allocate elsewhere in other places. That's the reality of what could happen here for J.I. And it's unfortunate. Jaden Ivey is a player that I've loved. Like you can go back 2 years ago. I've talked positively about Jaden Ivey for a while, well before he ever was a chance of him becoming a Chicago Bull. And so I've seen the player that he has been. But unfortunately, who he has been is not who he is now. If he was who he was that before season, in the almost 18 points per game, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 40% shooting from three, there'll be no doubt that he would be a piece that's worth keeping here in Chicago. But with the injuries and the way that they're happening and the luck, sometimes, bad luck is the only luck that you have. As Bulls fans, I think that we know that and we are familiar with that. And that's just the reality of what Jaden Ivey's situation is. So let me know what you guys think on Jaden Ivey down below. If this latest bump in the road is just that for him, or do you think that this is a more sign for the Chicago Bulls of do not re-sign this guy? Unless you are getting a super team-friendly short-term deal, maybe 1 year with the player option or team option in the second year. So that way, if he does kind of show out, you can have another year of cost effectiveness. I don't know, but let me know what you guys think on that, because the Jaden Ivey situation, it's one that I really wish would have went a different way, because I could see how he can help this team either as a bench scorer or even next to Josh Giddey. But the reality of it is, man, when you look at guys, Anthony Simons, Trey Jones, Colin Sexton, those guys are all people that I would want to play ahead of, or the Bulls to keep ahead of Jaden Ivey at this point if they can, because Jaden Ivey just seems like such a concern there. But with that said, a lot of talk's been made recently about the Bulls and what they can do in free agency. So I came up with a free agency target tier list. Right now, this is going to change. It's going to ebb and flow. But I have dream targets, optimistic targets, and then a realistic target if everything kind of falls through, right? So as far as the dream target tier for the Chicago Bulls, I have Walker Kessler and Peyton Watson, right? I think that, for both things of what you're looking at, that's kind of what the Bulls need. Walker Kessler, a defensive center that isn't going to be easy to pry away from the Utah Jazz, but reportedly the Jazz have a cap on what they're willing to pay him of $30 million. So you got to think the Bulls are going to probably have to offer $35, $36 million if they want to try to even keep the Utah Jazz from matching the offer sheet. If you do that even over 4 years, you're looking at $140, $150 million deal in that case, right? But Walker Kessler brings so much of what the Bulls need. And I think also people forget that Walker Kessler has more offensive ability than what he's shown. He just hasn't needed in the Utah Jazz. But also, this has been a team that's been tanking literally since he got there. So Walker Kessler is when you talk about a lob threat, pick and roll defender, a rim defender as well, all those type of things, that's what Walker Kessler brings. And he brings that defensive mindset that we need with having guards that can create for him, because he's not really going to create his own shot. And he could be a perfect acquisition by the Chicago Bulls. And then I have Peyton Watson on here. Now, Peyton Watson would only be if the Bulls do not draft a wing. I think if they draft a wing, they're not going to go after. Even if it's a shooting guard, I don't think they'll go after Peyton Watson, because that 2-3, the Modest could play a lot of the 3 next year. If you draft a 2 because of, Noah Essengay, Leonard Miller, Jalen Smith, those type of things. And I know some people, my boy Vaughn, talk about Peyton Watson playing the 2. I'm not really, his minutes at the 2 aren't promising to me. I think he's better as a 3-4. But these are the 2 guys that I think the Bulls would do very, very well to kind of focus on. Now, Peyton Watson's situation is a little bit different from Walker Kessler, but similar in some ways too. The Denver Nuggets are not going to pay the repeater tax. Nikola Jokic has actually been pretty boisterous in that franchise about the reluctance to play the repeater tax because they keep losing key pieces. But while the Denver Nuggets could very well trade a Cam Johnson or another player so that they can keep Peyton Watson, which could be likely, if they do not do that or do not find that trade partner, it's another player that the Bulls would have to overpay just to keep Denver from even thinking about, matching that offer sheet. And even then, they'll still think about it. But Peyton Watson next to Modest Buzelis would be a dream fit. You could have Peyton Watson, Modest Buzelis, Noah Essengay, Jalen Smith, Leonard Miller, like all those kind of guys playing at the 3, 4, 5, like kind of overlapping with that with some of those positions, with Jalen being able to play the 5. It's interesting as far as a more modern forward pairing. I think that those are kind of the dream targets by the Chicago Bulls. Optimistic targets. I got Ben Mathurin and Tari Eason. Now, Ben Mathurin is more of a two-way guard than anything we've had next to Josh Giddey. I wouldn't necessarily call him two-way yet. Sometimes his defense can fall off, but we've heard that the Bulls had interest in Ben Mathurin. He's going to be a restricted free agent, even though he was traded to the Los Angeles Clippers. They're going to be looking to retain his services, as it seems like they're ready to reset younger on that roster. But if you can pry him away, again, restricted free agent, you have to put out a big offer sheet to do so. Tari Eason, same boat. Now, Tari is mainly defense, not a lot of offense. So even if you are going to go Tari Eason route, which I look at Tari Eason saying that it's just basically more of what you got from Isaac Okoro, but at a higher caliber, right? Whereas Isaac Okoro has some offensive explosion games. You can have that from Tari Eason. I think Tari Eason is a decent cutter. Having got guards like Trey Jones, Josh Giddey that can find him on the cut, maybe you can make his offense more efficient, but it really comes down to the switchability that he brings defensively, right? And those are the things that you're really looking at with some upside still there in Tari Eason. And Ben Mather, similar prospects in different ways, but I think we've heard enough about the Bulls being interested enough in both these guys where it makes some sense for the Bulls to revisit that this year in restricted free agency if some of the other targets aren't made available. And I think that's a key thing for the Chicago Bulls there. Tari Eason, Ben Mather, optimistic target list. Again, not to pair, and maybe you get one dream target, one optimistic target. Maybe you go a Walker Kessler and a Ben Mather, or a Walker Kessler and a Tari Eason, or a Peyton Watson and a Ben. I don't think you go Peyton and Ben Mather unless you draft a center, but there you go on that one, right? And then realistic targets. Mark Williams, I think, is a more realistic target. Isaiah Hartenstein, if the Thunder do opt out of that contract, those are two more realistic targets at that center position. Mark Williams is a guy that I like. He has one of his healthiest seasons this year as far as the amount of games that he's been able to play. But with the Phoenix Suns kind of overachieving this year, I don't know if the Suns will be apt to let Mark Williams go, how much they want to keep him. Now, they have young centers in the wings there that they can have. They have Kaman Malawak, again, a guy that, you could look at being ready, after spending some time to develop him this season. Do they think that he's ready to start next year so that they don't have to pay a Mark Williams? You got also Iguodaro there, who they've played. Also, Rasheer Fleming, who can play a little bit of center as well. Another guy that's young, that's shown and flashed some games for them at times. Mark Williams is out right now with injury for the Phoenix Suns, but he's averaging 11 points, 8.1 rebounds on 63% shooting this season, which, again, one of his best and most healthy seasons as well as far as efficiency and stuff like that. He's played 56 games. He's probably going to finish around 62-ish games played this season if he can get back out on the court soon. So I like Mark Williams' skill set. I don't like the part of betting on him solely to be your center of the future. I think you still have to do something else with your center of the future if that's what you want to do. My personal opinion. And then Isaiah Hartenstein. If the Thunder do opt out of that contract because of their salary situation, I think the Bulls should be one of the first teams to call him. But not to say that he's going to necessarily be cheap, but I think that he brings a lot of exactly what you need, and buys you time to find your center of the future. He can start for you for probably the next 3-4 years, and you got some time to find a center of the future for you. That's my thought process. That's kind of my tier list. Again, we may revisit this in another month or so. Things could change. We may do a post draft lottery version of this as well. So let me know what you guys think on all of that down below. But that's going to do it for today's episode, y'all. You guys know I appreciate you. I want to hear from you guys on this one, though. Are you rooting for wins and losses right now? Or is it one of those things of, it's out of your control, but I want to see my guys play well? What do you think the Bulls should do with Jaden Ivey? And who do you want the Chicago Bulls to target in free agency this year? Let me know what you guys think on that in the comment section down below. Make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel as well. You can follow us at Bull Central Pod. You send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. And lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that is thanks to you, lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Breaks Media.